name is Evelina Krumova, and I'm a product manager for Reference 360 in Informatica. Okay, so at first I will share a little bit about Reference 360, and then I will walk you through the UI with some navigation tips and tricks. I will show some modeling exercises, and I will show you some of the existing data that I have in my current demo environment. Then I will share with you managing code values, which is creating drafts and making changes to the code values, and some tips and tricks there, and also how to compare values, and some bits of approval workflow, how to send items for approval, and then rejecting and sending back. And then we will talk about import and export, and in the end, I will share some things on the REST APIs. So first of all, with Reference 360. So what is Reference 360? It is the next generation of reference data management solution. It is a cloud-based solution in which different users within an organization with different roles can define, govern, and collaborate on reference data, on enterprise reference data. You can also enrich the data and distribute it to other systems. So in short, there are different systems from which reference data can come, and then you manage it within Reference 360, and there are different user roles that can work with the reference data, like data stewards, business analysts, compliance, other stakeholders, business owners, and the subject matter experts. You can put data in Reference 360 from various systems within the company, but also from external sources, to the company, like standardizations. And also after that, you can, after managing the data in Reference 360, you can also share it across other applications within the company, and for reporting and other and data transformation. So in short, Reference 360 is a one-stop shop for all the enterprise reference data within your company. What are the features of Reference 360? So you can manage enterprise reference data, also hierarchies and crosswalks. So with crosswalks, what we mean is translation tables between data from one system to another system. You can also collaborate on reference data, and we provide lifecycle management for the reference data. And with managing reference data in Reference 360, you can avoid inconsistent reporting and remove the operational overhead. So what is Reference 360? It's cloud-based. It's a self-service module for business users. So the UI is purposefully built for business users. And you can import and export external and third-party reference data sets within Reference 360. With this, I would like to go in the product itself. So I'm going in my production environment, where I have various reference data sets. So first of all, when you log into IICS Cloud, you have the choice to choose which application you want to use based on what licenses you have in your organization. In my case, in our case, we're going to Reference 360. And in Reference 360, as soon as we enter, we see the Explore view. In the Explore view are listed all the reference data sets and code lists. Now, what is a reference data set? A reference data set is a container and template for lists of reference data code values. So within the reference data set, you can define different code lists. And actually, within each of those code lists, you have the code values or the actual data that you are managing. When I say that the reference data set is a container and also a template, it means that the attributes that you define on the reference data set level are actually the things that will be propagated on code lists that you create, additional code lists. So as an example, you can have a reference data set for all country code reference data that you get in your organization. And within it, you can define that the most important things that will be available in all of those sets will be name, code, and description. And you can additionally extend the model for specific implementation of this reference data. So the specific implementation would be the actual code list, which is tied to, which can be tied to what application the data comes from. So, for example, you can have code lists that represent the information coming from some standards like ISO country code 3166, or you can have code lists that represent information from your CRM system or from any other system that uses country code information. In the definition of a reference data set or a code list, you have some items like the name of the reference data set, a description of it, so what type of data you will store in this reference data set, the domain, confidentiality, and priority. Domain, confidentiality, and priority are different properties of the reference data that you can specify in your organization, and those are and the values for these properties you can define in each tenant. So they are not predefined by us. You can define them based on your business needs. In the definition, you can choose the structure of the data, whether it's hierarchical or dependent. Hierarchical structure, I will share in a bit examples, but it represents hierarchies of data, such as, for example, industry classification codes, some of the healthcare codes, profit centers, cost centers, and regions. So information or values that can be grouped by a specific hierarchy in a specific hierarchical level. Also, you can define attributes, and the attributes can have different types. One of the default type for name, code, and description, or for any new attribute that you add, is string, but there are also other available. And if I start creating a reference data set, we can see all of them. And the attributes that you can add can be of type string, decimal, integer, boolean, date, and reference data. Reference data would mean an attribute that is pointing to another instance of a reference data. And I will show it in a bit in an example. Another thing that you define on the reference data set level, and then you can extend additionally on the code list level, are the stakeholders. Stakeholders are the users that have specific roles on this asset. So we have in Reference 360 4 roles. They are Reference 360 stakeholder. This is a user that can view the data and can also propose modifications. but cannot directly submit or publish changes to the data. Those users are usually people within the organization who have some stake in the meaning of the reference data, but are not responsible for it. They are not the data stewards. Then we have the primary owner. The primary owner is the user, or the users in this role are actually responsible for defining the model. So what are the attributes that each code list or reference data code list should have, and what are some validation rules on it, what are the display attributes that are being shown, and what are the relationships between different reference data sets. The business steward is the data steward. So this is the person responsible for the data inside the code lists. So this is the semantic owner of the data. What they're responsible for is approving any changes to the data. They can also make any changes to the data, and they can also create crosswalks between different code lists within a reference data set. So for example, if you want to map data from Workday to PeopleSoft, you can have a crosswalk between the reference data between those two systems, and the business steward is the person who creates it. This role, the people in this role are the ones who know what the different values within each different list represent, and also how those mappings go. So for example, if a country code is Germany and it's represented as 1, 2, 3 in one system and in DEU in another system, this is the person who knows that this is the correct mapping. We also have the role of business analyst. And business analysts are the users that have read-only privileges on the data. What they can do is they can view the data, and they can also export the data. So those are all the things that we can define on the reference data set level. Now, going through the Explore tree, we can also open the reference data set, and this will allow us to modify it. If we go back to the Explore tree, we can also go into each and every one of the code lists and also open them for working, for modifications or for adding data. Now, in my environment, I have quite a lot of reference data sets. So, for example, if I want to look at something specific, I can search it here above, and I want to look at industry classification. And I can easily see within the Explore tree all the reference data sets or code lists that have industry classification somewhere in their name. Other things that I can do with the Explore tree is I can group information so that it's easier for me to consume it. So for example, the default grouping is by reference data set. So everything is ordered as reference data set. But I can also order them by status. So if I have items in active, draft inactive, or any other state, I can look at them from here. And this is some sort of grouping of my data. So I'm currently, for example, interested at all code lists that are marked as active, and I will I sort here, and I can take a look at them. I can also group by domain, group by priority, or by the person who approved them. In my environment, I have a few users that have approved different of those code lists and reference data sets. So I can group all of the information based on the approved by field in the code list and reference data set. I can also choose to show only code lists because I'm not interested in the groupings. Or I can choose to show only reference data sets because I'm not interested in the code lists themselves. I want to have an overview of all the data. I will get back to the default ordering for now. Something else that I can do is I can search for values or reference data sets or code lists within the search menu. So I can choose whether I want to search for a given specific term within reference data sets, code lists, or code values. I can take a look, for example, whether I have information about coal. And I have information in different code lists and in different reference data sets. So I have here some information like what is the name of the value that satisfies the search result and what is the code for it. I also have information what is the code list it belongs to and the reference data set. And if let's say I'm looking at coal mining, and I can open the coal mining here and go directly in my hierarchy for industry classification and see the coal mining value within the hierarchy and in the context of the search. Going back to the search, I can also choose to only look at reference data sets that correspond to this information, and I can see that there are none of them. I can also look at code lists, and there are none of them. In this case, only code values are available. But if I search for country code, then I will receive a lot more information. And even when I go to reference data sets and code lists, I will see all the possible results with additional information for them. So in addition to the, as a difference from the code value information, what we have when we look at reference data sets are the properties that we have defined previously, like domain. We also have the description, status, and here is the type. Here is reference data set. For code lists, we have the same information. Other places in the UI that are worth mentioning are the tasks menu, where you have all tasks that you have received, all approval tasks, whether because you are a business steward and you need to approve something, or because you are initiator of an approval request and you need somebody to approve your request, and they have returned it back because you need to make additional adjustments. We also have an import monitoring UI, where you can see all the imports within the tenant, within this environment, and whether they have been successful or failed, or are still running. From here, you can see how many items were important in each of the assets, and assets here are code lists and crosswalks. What is the current status, and what is the duration of the import. In case of an error during import, you can also download a spreadsheet that states what the error is. This is true for imports that happen both through the UI and through the API. We can take a look at the result of error imports later when we talk specifically about imports. Another item to mention is that with the help icon, you can go to the online help, where you can see the documentation for Reference 360, including the What's New section, the overall documentation with the key concepts and all the operations, as well as the REST APIs. So since I went through all of the major features of the UI, or how to navigate through the UI, I would like to go with the next section, which is modeling, and to share more details about reference datasets, code lists, and crosswalks. So if you have enough permissions, and my user has enough permissions, you can model data in Reference 360. And you can do this by clicking on New and choosing what type of data you want to model, whether it is a reference data set, which is a container, whether it is a code list where the actual code values stay, or a crosswalk, which is a definition as mapping between two code lists. I will start with the reference data set, and I will define a few items on it. So I would like to start with the currency reference data set, where I will describe currencies of the world. What is the domain? I would say it's, in my case, I have finance, geography, and social, so I will choose it as finance. I can choose what is the confidentiality. In our case, for currency, this is public information, and for priority, whether it's critical for my business, high, low, or medium. So I would say that currency is important for my business, but it's not critical or high, so I can go with medium. And the status, I will say that currently it's in draft. These, as I mentioned, these four, the values within those four properties are things that your administrator populates after the tenant is created, the organization is created. When we go to the definition, I can choose whether this is a hierarchical or dependent structure. Currencies, they are not hierarchical, so I will not choose anything here. And I only need name, code, and description. I don't need any other attribute at the moment for my overall definition of currency. There is one more setting here, which is display settings. When I configure the display attribute, this means what will show up when my item is used in crosswalks or in other places. So here in the display attributes, I can choose name, code, description, or in advanced, any combination of the attributes that I'm using. So for example, if I want to make sure that whenever the code lists that I will have from my reference dataset are being, the values in them are being displayed, I want to show both name and code. I will add both of them here, and this is how they will show up. First the name and then the code. If I want the other order, I can start by first having the code, and then I can add the name. So now if I try to save this reference data set, I will receive an error since I already have a currency reference data set in my environment. So the system will try to save it, and I will receive an error that it is duplicate. And in order to make it unique, I need to change the name of the reference data set. I will call it currency demo 2. And I don't have an item with this name, so it creates it. The system creates it for me. You can see here that in the list, I have an enterprise currency demo 2 list created. By default, when we create a reference data set, there is a default code list created, which is the enterprise code list. And we propose the enterprise code list to be used as a sort of truth, where you actually can have all the data within your organization for a specific type, and all the mappings within the enterprise data that you're going to use for your reporting, and the individual systems, like specific instances of the data that you're using within PeopleSoft or Workday or any other solution that you have within your company. We can, of course, add additional lists, but for our demo, I will leave this to one of the next examples. So after we have created the currency, we can create additional reference data sets that will use it. So for example, we can have country codes that use currency. And in my case, I have country code reference data set that is an old one, and I've been using, and I have a lot of examples in it of different code lists. And in it, I don't need to have a currency description, well, in my country codes, I can, in a lot of them, I have only name and code and description. And then when I have additional code lists within them, I can add additional information. So in ISO country code 3166 currency, I have attributes, name, code, description, alpha 2, alpha 3, icon, and also I have currency. In the definition, I have added a reference data attribute of type currency for this one. But in addition to countries, there are other data that may have relationship to currency. So for example, I can have regions, and I can define here as a reference data set regions, and I will say that this would be my geographical regions. For me, the domain would be geography. It will be internal information, but not confidential, and it will be of medium priority. I will still put it in draft. Now, overall, for the regions definition, I would also need only name and code and description. I will not need additional information. But one thing that I want to make sure is that some of the code lists that I have with information about regions will need to be hierarchical, but not all of them will be hierarchical. So for this purpose, I don't need to mark the reference data set itself as hierarchical, and I will save it as is. I will create under regions a new region. And when I create a code list, you can see that I have an additional property here that is called application. And I can choose what is the application for which I'm creating this region. And I can say that it will be for CRM. In the definition, I would like this region to be hierarchical. And defining it as hierarchical, I can choose how many levels my hierarchy will have. Now, we support unlimited, which means that validation on the levels, on how many levels you have, will not be performed. Or you can say that you have only up to 4 levels in the regions values. So, for example, let's say my regions are defined as world, then by continent, let's say, sorry, not by continent, then a region like EMEA, then I go Europe, then I can go to Baden-Württemberg, which is a region in Germany. And I would say, okay, I don't want to have more than 5 levels of depth in the hierarchy. I only want to go up to 5. So that's when I can say that I want to have only 5 levels of hierarchy. I would choose here unlimited because I don't need this additional validation. And I would say that in my company regions, I would like to also have currency. So I will put here currency, which would be a reference data set, and an attribute of type reference data set. And since it's an attribute of type reference data set, I can choose which one I want to use. I will use here the one that I created a few minutes ago, which is currency demo 2. And as a code list, there is only one instance of this reference data, so I'm going to use the enterprise currency demo 2. I can also choose in the display attributes what type of information from the currency I'd like to have when I'm looking at my region's information. So for me, it will be a little bit confusing if I only see the code, because EUR I know, USD I know, but some are things that for my business users will be difficult to understand. So I would like to allow them to view the currency information by first having the code and then the name. So once we have data in the currency, we will see both the code and the name, and it will be easier for the business user to see what data they're working with. Okay, I think I have done everything here. So now I can save my the definition of my code list. Okay, I have my code list. And within my regions information, I actually have two code lists. So one is the enterprise regions demo, out of which I will get the data and share it to EDW, and all my reporting will go from there. And I also have my company regions data, which is information that I'm going to use in my CRM system. So I would like to have some sort of a mapping between the data coming from, or with which I'm working in my CRM system, and the data that I'm using for my reporting. Now, I don't have data at this point, but I can still define that I want to have those mappings. In order to define this, I need to be a business steward, and my user right now has the role of primary owner, who is able to create the data, to create the model, but also the owner, the role of a business steward, who is able to create crosswalks. So I will create here a new crosswalk, or I can even create it from the new menu. I will create a crosswalk between company regions and enterprise regions. And as soon as I create it, I can start mapping values. Since I don't have data in any of my in my code lists, I am not able to map it. But I will show you right now an example of existing data that I have and how those mappings are done there. Now, I can go back to country codes, and I can look at my enterprise country code. In my enterprise country code, I have definition of the countries with which I'm working in my organization. And then I have crosswalks between the data in my enterprise country code and the data coming from various other systems. In the crosswalk tab, I can see in one place all the mappings between all the systems that I have created already. So in this case, we can see the mappings here. Now, since the names are the same, for us it looks like they're actually the same data. But when we go to the specific instance, like for example, let's look at ISO country code 3166. We can see that the code of for the countries is actually either a 3-char data or 2-char data. Whereas when we look at the enterprise country code, we will see that the code value is actually a number. So when we do the crosswalk mapping, the mapping between both, and I will just open the crosswalk. So in order to open a crosswalk, we click on Open Crosswalk and choose the one that we want to look at. So I want to look at the crosswalk between Enterprise Country Code and ISO Country Code 3166. When I open it, I can see over here the presentation of both code lists, and the values that I see here are actually the values that I have defined as display attributes. So for example, in Enterprise Country Code, I have defined the display attribute as name, and in ISO Country Code, I have defined the display attribute as also as name. And this is why I can see only the names. And for me, as a business user that would like to do the mappings, it is way easier to recognize that Albania is Albania in both lists, and not that ALB is the same as the number 4 in ISO Country Code 3166. Now I have another example where I have configured the CRM country codes to have both their code and a value as display attribute. So when I open the crosswalk, I will see the mappings listed like this, and I can choose which values to map to each other. How I map the values? I just choose one mapping from the left column and one mapping from the right column. So for example, I want to map Afghanistan, and I'm sure I don't have Afghanistan on the other side. Yes, I don't have it. And I can check really quickly, even though they're sorted by name. But I can check whether I have Afghanistan by searching. No, there is no data here. And that's why, as examples, I map usually data from one place to a few places on the right. So I can look for Virgin Islands, and I don't have it in this code list. Okay. So I can first unmap Albania. And how do I do it? I have this delete icon here, and I can choose to unmap it. And now I can choose to map Albania to Albania and the first three items on the right list. How I map it, I select here, and then click on the mapping button. And now I have a mapping between Albania on the left side and three values on the right side. Now I realize that actually this is not correct, and I need only one of those mappings. And again, I try to delete. And I can choose which of the items to delete. And the value is unmapped. I can also export the data from here, from the mappings, so that I can use it in other systems where I do some transformations, or even when I want to do reporting and I want the mapping in my EDW, so that I can do reporting from there. And exporting mappings, we can choose the name, the delimiter, and then we will have a file with the exported mappings. We export data in CSV format. And here are the exported mappings. We have the ID from the first list and the ID from the second list. If we have multiple items mapped on the right to the left, then we will have multiple entries here as separate lines. I can also, since I can export the data, I can also import the mappings. So the mappings are done between the code values of the values of the code attribute of both lists. So I can have a file with this format and import the data within the Crossworks. Okay. Now, from modeling perspective, what we have is, I want to show you the example of hierarchical data before we actually start managing the code values, or before we start importing them. So I have industry classification and ICD codes as examples of hierarchical data in this environment. So in industry classification, I have NAICS and SIC 4-digit. You can see hierarchical here as the example in the search previously. We have on the first level, for example, agriculture, forestry, fishing, and hunting. And then going in, we have crop production, which is subdivision of agriculture, forestry, fishing, and hunting. Then we have oilseed and grain farming, which is a child or a subdivision of crop production, and so on and so forth. We can go to a very detailed level here. So the hierarchical structure is mostly used for helping the business user visualize and work with data that has subsets or subdivisions or some types of grouping. So in this case, we have all these code values for crop production, animal production, and so on, being all the same part of the structure of agriculture, forestry, and so on. Here in this example, we have sorted by the code value. And the code value in our case here is a string. So the items are sorted with string values. I have an example where there are integers, and the items are sorted with their integer codes. Now, within a hierarchy, we have here, those are the parents on the topmost level, all of them in the root node. And within each level, we have additional levels underneath. And for example, on each level, you can have multiple items. You can have a very deep hierarchy, as it can go here, even though it's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 levels. Or you can have a flat hierarchy where you have only 3 levels and multiple items on one level. It depends on your business case, whether you need to work with a lot of subdivisions, or and also on your business users, how better it will be for them to visualize and group the data. There is also one more type of modeling here, and this is, as we saw in the definition of reference data sets and in code list, the dependency. So I will show here the state code example. In state code, so state codes by themselves don't make sense. So when you say California, okay, California is part of the USA, everybody knows it, but there are examples of states that can have the same name in different countries. So, and the state in itself, it's not an independent entity. It is always related to country. So we define here state codes. We define this type of dependency as marking the reference data set or the specific instance, a code list, as being dependent on another reference data set. Also here we have a display attribute, which is what the user will see when they need to work with the values for managing the data, or when managing the data with the values within the state code, what they will see from country code, whether it will be the name or the name and description or additional information. So we can take a look at the data in enterprise state code, which is none in this environment, and we have CRM state codes, where I have more data. In the data itself, I have the name and the code of the state code, and currently the dependency is displayed only on the right panel. So we can see that Alabama has the dependency of United States of America. It is in United States of America. So now that we have created some simple model, and we can start getting data into the system. And there are, as we just talked, two ways of getting data into the system. One is by editing the data within Reference 360, and the other one is by importing data from another system. Now, in order to edit data, what you need to do is to create a draft. And I already have a draft for this one, but I will create a draft in one of the items that I just created. So I go to Currency Demo, and I have the Enterprise Currency Demo 2 code list, and I need to add information to it. So I create a draft, which means that, hey, I am managing this data, and I'm making changes to this data. And when I open an item as a draft, it is locked, so nobody else can actually change the data in it. Now, I can log in with another user. I can log in as another user in the same environment. And if I look at the same code list that we just worked with, so first of all, we will not find it here because I have grouped it by approver, and I haven't marked approved by field. So there is no approver for it. And if I choose to group by reference data set, then I will be able to find it. Or if I choose to group by status. So I will go with Currency Demo 2. And you can see over here that I have this lock icon on the Enterprise Currency Demo 2 list. And when I click on it, it's locked. And when I open it, I can only see the published version. And I can see here that this code list is logged by Evelina Krumova, by me, since and the date when it was logged. So whenever you lock an item for editing, everybody else will be able to see that you are working on it and since when, and nobody else will be able to work on it. Now, I want to add some information, and I'm going to add a few currencies. I will add here euro with the code euro, EUR, and a description of euro. And then I can save or save and add new. And I can add now USD, and then some description. Then I can directly publish the data or send it for approval. And I can also, first, before doing this, see all the changes. Now I have just added two new fields in an empty code list. So all the changes that I will see will be the fact that I have added 2 new fields. But as soon as I make more changes, I see all of the changes in this comparison dialog. I can also see whether the changes are that I have added something, edited something, deleted something, or moved it. And we will take a look at all the other examples in a bit as well. Now I have reviewed my changes and I just want to publish the draft myself. So why do I have the option to publish the draft and to send for approval? In this asset, I'm both a stakeholder, which means that I am able to send items for approval so that somebody else can approve them, but also I'm a business steward, which means that I have the right to publish the data. If I was only a stakeholder, I would see only send for approval. And in this case, I will just publish the draft. And now my data is in. One item that I haven't shown when looking overall at the Reference 360 UI is this History tab. Now, what is the History tab? Here is all the information of all changes that have been done within the given asset. So in my case, I have above here all the changes that have been done to the model itself. So the fact that I added a description, that I made it to be not hierarchical, and the name. But also, in addition to this, I have a history of the values, the change values. So I have created a new value with code, description, name, and status. And I also have created another new value with the same type of information. Now here you can see the modified by, which is the identifier of the user that I'm currently logged in with. But you can also see here when exactly was this change made. And the time is in UTC. Now, since I already have values here, I can also start start populating information in my regions data. So I can go to company regions, create a draft, and create a region that is called world with, I will give it a code world as well, and the description, global region, just global region. The default, I don't have a currency for this region, so I will not put any currency here. So I would like to have all the other values to be under this record. I would create them here directly under world. When I click on the plus button, I can add, for example, EMEA with code EMEA and description EMEA. I would say that the currency for EMEA would be euro. This is not completely correct, but for my purposes, this would be the case. And I will save it. And you will see that my region EMEA is currently under the region world. I can add another item, which would be region North America. And the default and the currency that I put here would be dollars. Okay, now I can publish my draft again and have the data in. And then when looking at the data, I realize that actually North America and world are at the same level, which is not the right thing. So what I can do is I can go again, create a draft, and then I can move North America to be under world, okay, by dragging and dropping. Now, I've done a little bit too much dragging to drop it under EMEA, so I drop it under world. And now I have the change location. And if I look at the comparison view, I can see that the changes that I have made are moving North America from the root level to be under world. I can also look at the entire context of all the data that I have, and I have EMEA and North America under world. Or I can choose to only look at the changes. I can again publish the draft. Okay. So I can also, if I want to create I want to add a new region now. Let's say APAC, again under world. And I will choose for currency again to be US dollar. And I would like to make a change to EMEA. The description would be something else. Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So to be a little bit more descriptive. When I do modifications, I need to click on Save. And I have my changes here. Now, when I look at the comparison, I can see that I have a new item added. And I also see that there is an edited item. And for the edited item, there is one field, one attribute that is in italics, and this is the description, EMEA and Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So this is the way I can see that this is exactly the attribute that was changed because it's in italics or cursive. Okay. Now, if I want to send this for approval, I will see the exact same comparison view here presented to me when I want to send it for approval. And I can state what is the priority of my approval request, as well as when is the due date. So for example, I can say the due date is the 31st of January. And here is a list of all the people to whom this approval request will be assigned. These are all the business stewards within my organization. I can add my comment here, please approve, adding a new region. And then I can send it for approval. When I send a change for approval, I can see here that my changes are pending approval. I can cancel my approval request, or view the published version. So over here, I see my changes, but I can also look at what is the published version. And the published version doesn't contain my changes. Now, I can go to the other user that I have, who is also a business steward in the organization. And if I refresh, I will see that I have a new approval request. So I have a notification that I'm requested to approve changes for a code list and who is the requester. I can then go to my tasks inbox and see the details of the approval request. Now, first of all, who is the item assigned to? What is the priority and the due date? What is the command from the requester? And all the changes here. I can review all the changes in the context of the entire list, and I can see the exact same comparison view as the requester sees when they request the changes. I also have received an email, which I'm not going to show at the moment, but yes, that has the information that the user and my username requested approval to the given code list. Now I can say that I can review the changes and can say that some information is missing or that I need more information, something else to be added. So for example, I will send back with the command that please add also LATAM. And then I have no longer the task. And when I get back to my other user, I will see that I received a notification. Your requested changes for code list has been sent back for you to review and further action. So I also received an email for this. And I can look at the tasks and see the comment. In the email also contained the comment. Okay, so I need to add one more thing. Good. So I will go to the company regions. And I will add one more item. But first I need to go to my draft version. So I will also add LATAM as requested. Okay, and I will also use US dollars as currency. Good. Now I can see all the changes that I've made. And I can send again for approval. With some comments. Okay, and then when I go to the other user, I have received again a new notification. I need to refresh my UI because I haven't. And I will have here again the request, and I can choose to, and this time I will choose to approve it. And all of this goes with emails to the additional notification over email in addition to the notification that are done here. Okay, and now we can actually come here again, refresh. I'm coming here and coming back, and we will see that there is no longer a draft, and all the changes are in. So we went through managing of code values and approval workflow. And the next topics left are import and export, as well as some examples with REST APIs. So we can go to the import example. Now, in order to import data in Reference 360, we have a fixed template file import that we currently support. And this file import can be executed both from the UI as well as from the REST API. The template from the file, the template file for the import can be seen from the when we start importing data. So I can go back to the currency example, and here I would like to start importing data. Now, if I am a business steward, I can directly import the data into Reference 360. If I am a stakeholder, I need to first create draft and then import the values. Even though I'm a business steward, I will create draft because I would like to first review the changes that I make and then to import the values. So when I start to import, I started from here, and I can download the template for my import. The template for import always contains two headers. So first of all, it is comma delimited, and my environment is with semicolon. So I will first format it so that you can see it. Sorry. Okay. Now over here, I can see the fields that need to be filled in order to get the data. First things you can notice is that we have two headers. So for each import, we need two headers. Second, I don't need some of the information here. I don't want to provide it, so I'm going to remove it, and it's also not required. I will also remove this type of information, the status and the effective date, which are values that I can populate also from the UI. And I will have on name, code, and description. So I can either manually fill in now the template, or I can also open a file that I have previously generated based on the given format from another system. I have one such file in my environment, and it's this one, Currency Enterprise Currency. It's again a text delimited file, and over here I have a lot of currencies. Yeah, and I can use directly this file in the import. I have name, code, and description, and I have filled in all the necessary data. So in your case, this can be data coming from another system, or it can be, and so it can be automatically generated from the import flow or export flow from the other system, and then import flow in Reference 360. In my file, I have added some additional information so that I have a complete view of the currencies. Okay. So I will go and proceed and choose the file. And here in the template, we have different options for delimiters, text qualifiers, code page, and some regional settings. At this point, we support different date formats and date and time formats, and decimal and thousand separator, but we don't have other regional patterns. We can choose, in my file is semicolon delimited, so I will choose the delimiter here, and then I will choose the file to use. So it's my, here in my data, and it's Currency Enterprise Currency. Okay, when I want to import data from the file import UI, I also see a preview of the data that is being imported. So here, since we don't have a lot of records, I have a preview of all of the records. And then I can click Finish. And I will receive information that an import job has started. And I can go to the imports and see that the import job is running. After some time, the import will succeed or fail, and I will receive a notification that the job has completed. So I receive a notification. It says that all the data is inserted, and I can see here again the same information from the import UI. And then I can go again to my code list and see that the data is in, that the data is already in. And since I did this import in a draft, I can again see changes that I have made, and I have added quite a few items. And since I already had some data, I actually edited one value, and this value is the USD, United States, the US dollar. I changed with this import the description from what I have previously entered to US dollar. Okay, now I can directly publish the changes, and then all of this information will be in. Okay, so this is a flat list, and for it we have the data. Now what will happen if we want to import data in a hierarchical list, or if we want to import data when we have references to another data set. There, the template is a little different in the sense that in addition to the attributes that we have, for hierarchical data, we have a parent ID, which is the ID of the code value, the node, where we want to attach our current node. So when we go back to, so when we go to our regions demo example, when we look here, we see world, APAC, EMEA, and so on, all the values. Now, for all the values, we will have parent ID. For world, it will be empty, and for the rest, it will have values. To better demonstrate it, I will actually export first the data. So in order to export, I only need view permissions to the asset. And I have view permissions since I also have edit permissions. So I can click on export. And here I can provide some export format settings. So for example, a delimiter, or if I have dates as a data type, I can provide here a date format. So for example, if my underlying system expects the data to be in a specific date format, I can provide this date format as part of the export properties, and I will receive the date format exactly as expected by the underlying system. Not the underlying system, by the downstream system. Okay, I will export my file, and I will call it company regions. And when we open the exported file, we can see that the fields are populated, the ones that we have, name, code, description. But also, we have here two more fields, which are the currency. The currency is the attribute of type reference data set that is currency. And we have parent ID. So the currency attribute has the code value. So here, we will always need to provide, when we import the data, we will always need to provide the code. And when we export the data, we always have the code here. And then the parent ID, here we provide the code of the parent item. So in our case, this is all of the items are in world, so the parent ID for all of them is world. And we can have, for example, an issue with the browser for a second. We can have an example in which the currency as here is displayed as a code and attribute name and name, whereas in the export file and after that in the import, we only need to provide the code value. Okay. In addition to the fields that we have defined, which are the 4, and the parent ID, we also have 2 additional data fields that represent the status of the current item and also the effective date. So when we edit items or even when we view them, we have these additional status details, and these are available for each and every code value in each and every code list to provide status and effective date. By default, the values get the status of the code list and the effective date as well. We can, of course, explicitly change those values. Okay, so now the effective date field is a date field. So when we want to import the data or export, we can, as mentioned, provide some parameters for the date format attribute, and we can do it in an additional example in a bit. Okay, having this data here, I can add a new item so that we do the import. And I will add, for example, a new region that is called, let's say, Germany, with code DEU, and currency code Euro, and its parent ID, I want to put it under EMEA. Okay, I can add also another item that is called, let's say, Stuttgart. This would be a region, and it will be under Germany. And I can import this file afterwards. So when I do an import, it's an upsert. So if data is not available, it will create it, and if data is already available, it will update it, as was done with the currency example. Now, this means that I don't need to provide. I can provide it, but I also don't need to have this information in the Excel spreadsheet when I do an import. So I can just provide the new values that I want to import because I'm not changing any of the information for the other ones. Okay, so I can again create a draft here. I can start a new import. And get the import from downloads, company regions. This was the last file that I updated. I will receive error for the formatting because I used semicolons. And after that, after fixing the delimiter, I can see also the preview. Now I import the data. And after successful import, it's successful. I should have under EMEA, Germany, and under Germany, Stuttgart. And if I, again, can do a comparison, and I can see the two new items, and I can see the entire hierarchy. And then I can publish the information with the new regions that I have just added during my with my import. Now, the import can, as I mentioned, can be created both by manually doing the creating the file, or by some automation where you export the data from one system, and then you create a file with the data exported from the source system, and then import it into Reference 360 with the APIs. Okay. Data can also be imported. When we talked about crosswalks, I mentioned that data can also be imported in crosswalks. The format of the import for crosswalks is from ID and to ID of the two items in the crosswalk. And with this, I would like to finish the topic for import and export, and I would like to go to the REST APIs. So, okay, a few items that I haven't showed actually related to approval process are, I just got reminded right now, are the fact that how to discard a request, and which is, well, when you make a change and you decide that you actually don't want to publish this change, you can discard it. So, for example, I can say that the effective date is the 12th of January, and I decide after that that I don't want this change, and I can change the description to Germany, and I don't want this change, and I can just discard the draft and not publish the change. And then the change will not be available in the data. Also, another thing worth mentioning here, oh sorry, it was in Germany. So another thing worth mentioning is that, for example, if you have a user that has read-only permissions in Reference 360, but you want to give them stakeholder permission into company regions so that they can propose changes, you can do this in the stakeholders role, in the stakeholders tab. And I will do it by switching to my other browser, and I will log out from here, and we'll log in with a user that has read-only privileges in Reference 360. So my user is a business analyst with read-only privileges, and I may have forgotten its password. Okay. And when I log into Reference 360, I see the same data, and I will configure to see all the data. And when I go to our regions, company regions, you can see that I can't do anything. I can export the data, but I can't create a draft, and I can't make any changes. Okay. So I have only read-only permissions for this code list. Now, if I go again to my user with more permissions, I will add here as a stakeholder, so Reference 360 stakeholder, this user that is called Ikunuva BA, my business analyst. And I will save the configuration. Now, when I switch to my other user, I will need to refresh my UI, otherwise I will not see the changes. But when I go to explore. And you see also that as a business analyst, as a user of that business analyst, I don't see here the new button because I can't create any code lists or reference data sets, anything. So I go back to company regions, and since now I have elevated my permissions, I can create a draft and I can start making changes. But since I am only a stakeholder and not a business steward, I only have the option to send for approval. I cannot directly publish the changes. So with this, I will share some more information on the REST APIs that we have. So first of all, I will go to the documentation in on our website. So we have REST APIs that allow to import and export model in Reference 360, to import and export data, both code values as well as crosswalk mappings, and to list information about reference data sets, code lists, and crosswalks. And the last API that we have here is for creating the enums, or managing listing and creating new seed values for priority, confidentiality, status, application, and domain. Okay, so those are the Reference 360 specific APIs, REST APIs. And there are also IICS APIs that are needed before you can start executing operations with the REST APIs. So first, each of those APIs will need a session ID in order to be authenticated to perform an operation. And the session ID can be obtained by logging in IICS. I will do the examples from Postman, since this is my tool of choice for running REST API calls. And in Postman, I have created a collection with the external APIs that we have here, as well as some variables that I use for simplicity. So in the collection that I have here two items, IICS logins and RDM requests. IICS login has only one API call, and the RDM requests are split in a few groups that are the org setup, which is related to updating the enumerations or the seed values in a tenant, then model import and export, then read model elements, which is for reading reference data sets and code lists, some information about them, and then import data and export data. In the import data, what we have is that you can also monitor the job status and get a report for failed job. So these two APIs are the equivalent of what happens in the UI when you look at the imports, the import monitoring UI. And yeah, when you look at a failed error report in the results in Postman, you will receive a JSON, whereas in the UI, what you have is an Excel spreadsheet that has what is the line number, what is the code of the value, and why did the import fail. I'm showing you this from the UI because I'm not going to show it in detail in the REST API itself. Okay, so here in my collection, when I go to the login API, I have information about the identity host. This is a variable that I use. And this information is different for this is the same for all logins that are done in IICS. This is the URL, and it's written in the documentation. So we use this URL, then after that VLAN 1 login, and then in the body you provide your username and password. That's why I'm not gonna show the body right now. And then you send, and you get authenticated, and you have the username, which is demoorg12demo in my case, and which are the effective roles, and also a session ID. So with this session ID, I can go in the next, in the follow-up query, API calls, and be authenticated. Now, the first item that we can look at is to list the all the seed values that we have. So for this one, I have the environment variable that is for RDM host, which is the location for the Reference 360 service. And it's again mentioned in our documentation. Let me show it. So first, for the session ID, here is the complete URL here. Look here. And then when you go to enums, this is the additional path, external v1 enums, and the entire server URL is listed. Okay, I don't have it right now where it's listed, but it's the URL in which you are working, and in the case, in this case, is the URL of my application, the same one. Okay, so I have here headers, and in the headers I will have accept application JSON and session ID. I have put in the session ID as the session ID that I got from the login. This is again an environment variable for me, but I can also just copy and paste it from the other, from here. So I can copy it from here and then put it as a session ID and then send the request. Now the expected result is all the properties that were listed, like application, domain, confidentiality, priority, and status, and all the values that we have with their keys and labels. So I have, those are my values for application, for domain, and so on. Now, this is the API only to view what you currently have. You can also view it in the UI by going and when you create a new reference data set, you will see the list of drop-down of all those items. You can also add enum entries, add the entries to those items with a patch REST API call. Now, you cannot modify existing data, you can only add to existing data. And here, again, we use the session ID. And since this is a patch request, we also have content type, which is, again, application JSON. In the body of the request, we say what is the new item that we want to provide. And if the item already exists, you will just see that it exists. You will not receive error unless you are trying to change something. And if it doesn't exist, then it will get created. So in my environment, I just have created a new status entry. Now, if I go back to the list items, this was the initial state that I had, active draft, inactive, and merge. And if I execute the API again, I will have the new in review status with key 1 and in review as label. Okay, so this is important for when you're setting up the organization or when you're modifying. So for example, you have a new application for which you want to manage data or some new values for status or confidentiality. Then what you can also do is import and export model. Why would you do it? So if you have a testing environment in which you create a model, and then you want to move it to a different environment, to a new environment, then you can export the model from one of them and import it in another one. Now, the important thing to, I will just show it. So the headers are the same, and in the body, you can say whether you want to get data exported for all reference data or for a specific reference data set ID. And if you want a specific reference data set ID, you would need to provide the ID. How do you get the ID? There are two ways. One of them is by using the APIs to list all the data. So for example, when I list all the reference data sets with this API, I have no body and this is only a GET API. I will see information about them with their IDs, name, and whether they are hierarchical. And from here, I can, for example, look into our currency demo 2. And I can get the ID, and I can export the model only for these reference data sets. And here I have all the information, which includes the reference data set, the code values, and all the configurations that we have about it. Let me make it bigger. Yeah, all the code value fields and all code lists. And in addition to this, you have also what are the enums, so that, for example, in the new environment, you can also have those seed values imported. Okay, and if I don't provide anything, I will get the entire model. And in my environment, this takes quite some time, or 2 seconds, because I have a lot of data, model entries. Okay, and then you can, of course, after you export the data, you can import it in a new environment. And in the body, you provide the elements that you want to import. The header stays the same. You have the same except content type and session IDs. And in the body, you can provide the exact JSON that you received from the export. In my case, I can import a new reference data set. So I will just export again what I have here with this reference data set. And without the code lists. and I will just change the name of the reference data set. So here I have currency demo 2. I will call it currency demo API. And I will import exactly the same structure that I had already with the currency in reference 360. Now I'm going to show it in the UI as well. So we can go now to the UI, and if I go to the export tree, I will see that I have a new reference data set called currency demo API, and it has the exact same properties that I had before, that I had in the other, in the currency demo 2. Now I have no data in it because I just created it. And okay, I then realized that I don't need it. So what do I do with it? I can delete it. And in order to delete a reference data set, I need to make sure that there are no code lists in it. If there is at least one code list, I can't really delete a reference data set. So I can go to the code list and delete it first. And then I can come here and delete the reference data set because I no longer need them. And the other interesting APIs are that you can actually import code values with the APIs. The things that you need to provide are the delimiter, text qualifier, and date format, and whether you want to do it to import data in a container type or in a code list or a crosswalk, and then the ID of the code list or crosswalk. I'm not going to show the import API. I'm going to show the export API, because in the export API, in addition to exporting code values with the same format that you see in the UI, it has also the ability to export data with filter. So for example, you can export code values by providing some filter. So for example, you want to check whether the effective date is in a given time range, or you want to export all data that is with some status, be it non-empty status or active or something like this. And then you also can export data that has some attribute value in that is of type reference data set. And as I mentioned, in the export API, you can provide delimiters, the semicolon, and you can provide whether you want to export data from a code list or you want to export data from a crosswalk. Okay, so first of all, I would like to export data, and for this I have a code list ID. I would like to export the data from my company regions code list. Now, one way, so I need to provide the code list ID. One way to do it is to go with the read model APIs, where I get first the reference data set ID and then the code list ID. And the other way to do it is in the UI, I go to company regions. And over here in the UI URL itself, I have code list, and then I have an ID. I can copy this ID, and then I can provide it here as parameter to my export query. Okay, so when I execute this query, I will receive the limited values for my company regions data. And I have the parent ID, and I have all the other properties. So it's exactly the same format of the data as we have in the CSV file. Okay, so I would like to see all data that has currency that is equal to USD. And I have a problem in my header. Okay, so header has to be JSON. And I have a problem with my request. Okay, so I received all data that has currency stated as USD. Oh, sorry, this is from another code list. I was wondering why I have is monarchy here. So okay, I will go try again. So I have my regions, and I have USD in Latam, North America, APAC, and that's why they are listed here. And since this is hierarchy, I also have listed their parent, which is world, because if you want to get to import again the hierarchy, you need to have also the parent node. Now, if I want to get all data that has euro as currency, and I have now EMEA, Germany, and Stuttgart, I don't have the other items. I can also list all data that doesn't have currency. So I have is empty equal true. Oh, I again chose the wrong code list. And I will have only the world region. And yeah, I can do similar examples with if I change the status or if I change the effective date, and I can get different values based on them. Okay, and yeah, more details on the exact parameters during export, the filters that can be used are in the documentation, and yeah, it's the filtering through the API, through the export API is quite powerful at the moment. It allows quite a few options for filtering the data. So when you want to, it allows also combinations. Like you can have a filter that combines the status is empty and the currency is euro, or so on and so forth, or even values of the fields themselves. And the filters support all the data types, which includes integer, string, the reference data type, date, and number, and Boolean.